Welcome to Follow Your Curiosity. Ordinary people, extraordinary creativity. Here's how to get unstuck. I'm your host, creativity coach Nancy Norbeck. Let's go. Author Matt Leyshon spends his days as a software engineer before morphing into a fervent writer at night. He's best known for his writing and research for his debut novel, Jack the Ripper, Live and Uncut, which has received the Jack the Ripper Book of the Year Award for fiction from the Ripperology community. He has also appeared as a Jack the Ripper expert at MegaCon and on the History Channel. Matt joins me today to talk about why that book was self-published for only 6 months, his foray into writing a thriller in a fantasy setting, the importance of encouragement in the creative process, why creative folks should always be bold and take chances to promote their own work, and more. Here's my conversation with Matt Leyshon. Matt, welcome to Follow Your Curiosity.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. An honor to be here, actually.
So I start everybody out with the same question, which is,
Okay.
Were you a creative kid or did you discover your creative side later on?
I was, in a way, I may have given away to the sporty side for a couple of decades after high school, but I definitely was. The first person to ever encourage me to write was my first grade teacher. And she read a story that I wrote where I was staying in a haunted house and eating chicken sandwiches with ghosts. And I guess it struck a chord with her. But I remember her parting words to me when we said goodbye at the end of first grade was write more stories. And I had other teachers give me that too. And I think it was something that was definitely present during high school. But once I got out of high school, like I said, it was more career in sports. But it wasn't until only maybe about 10 years ago that I really got back into the exploring my creative side and writing more. But yes, definitely always been an outside the box kind of guy. And that has actually reflected in my work too. Even though it's boring computer software engineering, I usually try to add some sort of flavor to it.
Well, I think that, I am not a software engineer, but I have worked in tech support. And I think anything where you're doing something like that, I mean, you're either creating something new or you're solving a problem.
Yes.
And I think there is a lot of creativity in either of those pursuits, whether it comes with a paintbrush or a violin or a computer keyboard.
It is. And sometimes it's helpful, but there's other times when it can be to your detriment. Yeah, I remember I worked on a help desk for a couple of years with a team of 7 guys, just a wonderful team, wonderful people. And a guy that had just come in, he had all the paperwork, all the degrees in network administration and all types of certifications. And we gave him a problem to troubleshoot. And he spent 2 days exploring what was wrong. And the answer was actually just simply changing the letter that was in a file from one to another. And if he changed that, it would have been fine. I learned that we all learned that through experience on the job. Mm-hmm. It just sort of goes to show there's just some things that a classroom can't teach you. And I think that might be why I didn't go to college. I sought a career in IT and I don't know whether it was feared or just felt that within 5 years, what I would learn would not be relevant 10 or 15 years later. So I thought just learning on my feet in the industry was the best way to go about that.
That's so interesting because so many people don't make that call.
And it's not something I advocate. I don't say, hey, you want to be like me. Like, it's, go to school, obviously. And in the early years for me, it was hard because, a lot of recruiters said that having a degree reflected like a commitment to the industry. But now I've been in that industry a quarter of a century. So I'd like people to think that I'm committed to it and that I'm here for the long haul. Obviously, unless a writing career supersedes that, which I would not complain one bit.
I would hope that 25 years would be evidence enough for just about anybody.
Commitment to anything, right?
Right. 25 years is a long time.
Yeah, for sure. I know I totally aged myself with that comment too, but that's all good.
It's all right. So you mentioned that your teacher really encouraged you. Did your parents have anything to say about you writing stories?
My parents were pretty supportive in that regard. I came from I grew up basically with my parents. My parents divorced when I was about a year old, so I was too young to really experience that. But I did grow up with a stepfather. My mother remarried. My dad didn't. But I guess when I discuss my parents, I should really be mentioning all three in that regard, and that they were supportive of those sorts of things for sure. I remember reading a short story I wrote to my mother late in high school, and it was basically about a bounty hunter that was stalking a notorious con man. And the only thing she really said was it was very heavy on the language, which is no surprise. It's the Australian way. But no, but she definitely liked it though. So no, I think it's always good to have encouragement from parents, but I think also never having discouragement is just as important too. So, some parents won't exactly be behind you and be like the soccer mums or dads cheering you all the way to the point where that's annoying. But as long as as long as parents don't really throw up that block in your way, saying, well, no, I don't want you to go and play the sport, or we don't want you to, you know, I don't want you to not go to college. But no, my parents were very supportive. My mother is one of my most avid readers. I know I win no prize for saying that. I think most people can lay that claim to that, but it was an honor when she read the first book that I wrote. Sadly, my father passed away, so he never got to see any of my literary works, but he knew I definitely had it in me.
Yeah, and you make a good point. I've been doing this long enough to know that there's a huge difference if you support your kids or if you try to get in their way. The kids who are supported have a much easier time making things work. And
Yes.
yet not being discouraged is still a dramatic improvement over being actively discouraged.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I would even go a step further and say that applies to spouses as well. I have a wonderful wife who is extremely supportive, and she's not really a beta reader, but my beta listener. When I write something, I usually read it out to her to get her, to get her input before anybody's. So I think that's also been a driving force for me. But supporting kids, absolutely. Like I have two. I have a son and a daughter. My wife and I completed the set, as we put it. But both of my children are also on the spectrum, and therefore support it's just at a different level. When it comes to that kind of thing. So no, I've learned the value of support from my own parents, but also from the parenting experience for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what happened that got you back into writing again?
I saw an advertisement on Facebook for the website Masterclass, and it was a class that was hosted by James Patterson. I was a big fan of James's stories. I read a lot of the Alex Cross books, and it was a class on writing. At that point, I tried to write. I think I tried to write one novel, and I just deliberately wrote only the scenes I really wanted to write. I got to about 60 pages, and it just was dead in the water at that point. But I did his masterclass, but it also had the incentive that you qualified for a competition where you could submit a book, a plot synopsis, and a sample chapter for a story idea. And the winner got to collaborate on their story with James Patterson. So I saw that as a huge opportunity. But for someone who's new to writing, it probably wasn't the best time to do that. But his masterclass was actually very helpful. I've done a few of the masterclasses with different writers, and I think you take something away from each one. There's some overlap, of course, but there's different things that you can take from each person that you listen to, because they've been there, that this is their area of expertise. And the big thing I took away from Patterson's was the importance of two things: was the importance of creating an outline for your story. I'm a planner, but also the importance of just constantly propelling the plot with every chapter. I've written a number of genres, but I think that's something that's been prevalent in everything that I've written. I still like to propel the plot, not necessarily at thriller or breakneck pace, but I like to give my reader a reason at the end of every chapter to want to keep going. No, it's not time for bed yet. You got another chapter in you. So
next thing you know, it's 2 a.m.
I've had that complaint from a lot of readers, and you know what? I will take that to the bank every time they say that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I know that they mean that as a compliment too. So yeah, I mean, as a writer, that's what you want. And that was a quote from Patterson that I really remembered the most. Was he said, if you read something to somebody and they say, well, that sounds good, or that sounds excellent, that's not really the response you want. The best response from somebody, if you either tell them about a story or read them a snippet of a story, or they read it, the best reaction is, what happens next? I would love to see more. I would like more. Like, that is what you want. And that was one of the early lessons in Patterson's masterclass. And that's something that's stuck with me ever since. I did not win his competition, but the day I found out I didn't was actually one of the happiest days I could imagine, because what I submitted to him was a story that I've always wanted to write, but I conceived the Ripper project and was fully into researching that. I already had a great history with the case, but I wanted to research that more, and I just loved the premise of that story. And I didn't see James as somebody that delved much into the non-fictional events in stories. He is completely fictional, so that's why I didn't enter it in the contest. It was more a case of I didn't think I'd have a chance. So much in writing is about exclusion.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is 130,000 words when you should have 90. No, we're not even going to read this. Like, and you send us this genre. Well, I represent this genre. I'm not even going to read that. Like, there's different. Sometimes I think, like so many things in life, people look for reasons to exclude things. And I saw a huge historical and non-fictional element in my story as something that would see me excluded from this competition immediately. So I submitted something that was a great idea on paper, a great story on paper, but yeah, as much as I wanted to write it, the Ripper one was more the direction I wanted to go.
Yeah, and I'm glad to hear that you didn't force yourself to write the other one first, because I don't think that ever goes well. I'm a big fan of going where the energy is, because the energy is there for a reason.
Right. In order to produce your best work, it should be. Right. Absolutely. I think there's a business element behind a lot of decisions when it comes to writing, but like you said, go where the energy is. It is a huge part of that. And I'm currently tossing up. I'm due to start a new story, and I'm tossing up between three ideas. I love all of them, and I really can't split one from the other. Like that level of energy or belief in writing it is the same. So I'm soliciting separate opinions on what I should do. Just thriller readers, basically. So which one of these again has that I'd like to know more facet to it. So and of course the vote's been split, so I'm no nearer to finding out which one I should do. So I think I'm just going to have to flip a coin or throw darts at a board or something and see where I land.
Is there one where you would like to know more?
All three.
Oh, okay.
No, well, that's biased, but one is a little more personal, I guess, and a little closer to home. And it does address something that I've always wanted to do, which was write a book that raised autism awareness. And I initially thought of an idea to write a book that was, I guess, autobiographical from a father's point of view. And it was my son's early years from birth to more or less halfway through kindergarten, because the early years are so important when it comes to diagnosis. And I had my agent tell me, and I basically people tell me not to write it for different reasons. and they're all valid. So it's very hard to go against some of the reasoning why I shouldn't, even though it's a story I would love to tell. Like I said, writing it in not a non-fictional, biographical, memoirish story is not the way to go. But being a thriller writer is one of my favorite lanes to write in. I did conceive a plot for a thriller which involves autistic characters, so I could. And I've actually, some people that have read parts of it have said, "Oh, I love this chapter and this chapter," and these were actually taken from real life experiences. So I see an opportunity to inject these stories and raise autism awareness like I planned, but also write what I consider to be a tight psychological thriller with high stakes, high tension, of course. And I think I can, address both writing needs in the one story, but also I think it's something that has a potential to be more meaningful than other stuff. I say to people, I write airport fiction something that you buy in an airport you'll read on a plane and probably not think twice about after you read it. But I don't mind if, to me, as long as my reader is entertained. But this is a story that I think would encourage debate. It would invite discussion, and and I would love to have one of my stories carry that type of meaning. And the story, though, I had planned to write in a dual POV, but these were people that were taking care of autistic children. I would never write in the voice of an autistic child. My son and my daughter are autistic, but I have that gives me no right to use that voice, in my opinion. But as a carer, I've lived that research for over a decade, so I think I'm pretty well qualified. Like I said, people's favorite scenes in this story that I've written so far, I've written nearly 100 pages. They're all taken from experiences from real life. So, sometimes it comes under so many things in literature, and that is, the truth is stranger than fiction. And that's like the Ripper book. I give people a bit of an info download after they've read the story, and they can't believe how much of it is actually true. It's a fascinating case. It doesn't need my help to embellish anything.
I think
even though I embellish something.
I think you're hitting on, that famous adage for writers that write what you know. I think the fact that those scenes are coming from your own experience gives them a veracity that people can feel, even if they don't know that that's where they're coming from.
I tend to agree. The write what you know is definitely a very famous line, I guess, or phrase that people refer to. I think my take on that is writing what you know is easier, but I think writers are definitely capable of writing something they don't know.
Yes.
And an example of that is another story that I wrote. I wrote a fantasy-based whodunit, and most people consider it to be the best story I've written to date. And I have very little background in fantasy reading. I read it a lot as a kid, but once I started reading thrillers, that totally took over. But obviously I've seen a lot of fantasy-based movies and things like that as well. But to write it, I had to definitely do, in a way, research on the fantasy genre and become a bit more of a student in the genre. And it was totally alien to me in terms of writing it. And it's a story I'm very happy with and very proud of. So, but that was a story it's not a case of write what you know, although there's a murder mystery in it with plots and like I said, the pacing of a thriller. Yeah, that's me staying in my lane and being comfortable, but it's entirely in a fantasy world with fantasy characters. So, there was a lot of unknown territory in that for me. So I do agree, writing what you know is more comfortable for a writer to express themselves. But also if it's something like the Ripper book, where it's got a lot of historical fiction in it, at least I took my research seriously, and it was over 14 months of research, which included writing the story as well at the time. But I take research for any story seriously, whether it's the Ripper's Whitechapel, or even in a book where I wrote where there was a prison visit, and I actually went onto their website and downloaded their manual for visitation procedures and what took place, and I reflected that accurately in the story. I could have written anything, but sometimes I just get to stick with the detail on some things. And like you said, I want to know what I'm writing about in that chapter. It is important sometimes, especially if your readers know, there is that stronger connection. And that was something that Gaiman said in his masterclass about the importance of using truth and fact to bridge a reader with fiction. If there is parts of this that they can identify with, it makes identifying with the unknown a lot easier. And which made me think, well, I am so screwed to write a fantasy in that case. but I'll do what I can. Again, that was very important information. That very important quote from Gaiman that I remembered, and I still think of that. And like I said, I try to be factual about different things that I put into my fiction. I've seen a lot of the writers that phone it in. I was at BoucherCon, and I saw somebody on a panel discussing research and stories. And the first thing they said after they introduced themselves was, well, I don't really research much for my stories. I'm thinking, why are you sitting there then? People want to know, people want to hear from the people that actually research, not the people that kind of research or only do a little bit of research. I'm a detail-oriented guy, and to see someone say that on a what I would consider a prestigious panel, which is BoucherCon, I was surprised and a little bit taken aback by such a way to introduce yourself to the panel. It's like saying, "Hi, I've got nothing valuable to contribute here whatsoever." So,
I mean, if you've written pure fantasy where you're making everything up, that's one thing.
yes.
But if you are doing something historical, I think, I started a historical novel a couple years ago that has been lying untouched for a while, but it was such a shock to me. I mean, it wasn't, because my MFA thesis novel is a fantasy novel. So I didn't have to do any kind of research. It was up to me to, decide what kind of place this was and all of the details. But if you're going to set something in a particular year in a particular place, there are always going to be people who know exactly how things were back then and will immediately write you off if you're obviously just making things up. But I also just found myself so curious, and the number of details that popped up that I was curious about, because I'm a pantser, so I had no clue where I was going. But I was sitting there going, okay, so when did electric streetlights become a thing in London?
Right.
And I never found a satisfactory answer to that, because I think it happened in patches and so there's not like a solid record. But at the same time, I wondered how long it would take for a letter to get from Shrewsbury to London. And I sent off an email to whatever the Royal Postal Museum is, and they sent me a whole timetable.
Oh,
and I just was like, wow, look at what you can find on the internet.
I've definitely got some stories there. I would like to tell one if I can.
Sure.
Well, firstly, yes, people are so accommodating if you're trying to, find out details, and again, I think it's just an appreciation for truth. But my favorite one was, I'm sort of giving up one of my stories here, but that's fine. There's a scene in my story, because my main character is is what's called projected. It's a form of time travel, and he's put somewhere, but he has the presence of a ghost, like say Patrick Swayze in Ghost.
Mm-hmm.
So he can see everything. He can walk around, go through doors. No one knows he's there. And as a trial mission, he is sent to the first time the Beatles performed in concert with Ringo. So the first time they were the Fab Four. And that took place in August 1962 at a place called Hume Hall. Now, I would get a lot of photos, different info, all that sort of thing. But I never could find out what Hume Hall looked like on the inside. For But outside, it's great. Google Maps, thank you, hello, because it hasn't really changed much over the years. But I couldn't, because nobody knew of the significance of that night, and this was pre-smartphone social media, that there's no photos that can really depict this for me. So I'm trying to find it. And the source that I finally came across, I found a YouTube clip of a busker named Danny McAvoy. And he was sitting in the middle of Hume Hall and he played an acoustic version of the Beatles song Misery. And at the end of the clip, he asked his daughter who was filming him to do a 360 panorama of the hall to show people what it looked like. And then he gave like this little 2-minute speech about the hall and its history. And I had my, pictures 1,000 words. I had like, 1,000,000 words to describe Hume Hall after seeing this. And I actually reached out to him over Facebook with a question. And he answered me about 2 hours later. And I could not believe the kindness of some people in some of the research I did. I encountered some people who were not as accommodating and were downright impolite and rude, but you're going to get that mixed bag. But for the most part, it was definitely very, very polite, very accommodating, and very helpful people. And when I briefly self-published the book, they're all in my acknowledgements for sure. I had to pay tribute to them for being so nice.
Absolutely. How fabulous to find that video that's almost like it was tailor-made for you too.
Right? Yeah, it was like it's like the virtual room tour you get of a hotel. I had that inside the Hume Hall, so it was totally empty as well, which was even better in a way. So yeah, it was just dumb luck. And like I said, I had a couple other questions for Danny. He's from Liverpool, so I had a couple of Beatles and Hume Hall questions, and he was more than happy to give me the information I needed.
That's fantastic. I love stories like that.
Yep. One of my most valued resources for my research was a busker.
There you go. Never underestimate buskers.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So we've kind of danced around the subject of the Ripper Project, and I think that you should tell us all about it.
Okay. A long time ago, I did write, it was my first novel. I wrote a story that involved, as I mentioned, time travel and the Jack the Ripper murders. When I was conceived the idea for the story, I thought, we'll never know who solved the murders unless you're there. And that was instantly like a light bulb for me. I thought, so much Ripper fiction has people peering around corners or hiding in shadows. What if I got a character in a situation where he is right there? He has a front row seat to all of this. And, hey, you want to get up and close and personal for the Ripper murders? Be careful what you wish for. This guy's going there. So I started plotting the story, but I also, because that world was already built, the requirement was to research it. And then I had to, but the world of the time travel that I invented was different, because I thought, okay, I'm writing about time travel, I'm writing about Jack the Ripper. These are two very well trodden tropes. I need to bring something fresh for both of these. And so that was what I did for like the first 3 months of the story, was working out how am I going to do that. And I even had my own like little Q&A for projection, like what rules were there? Do I get tired? Do I get hungry? Do I feel the elements? Do I follow the laws of gravity? These sorts of things. And to me, I had to have those answers first before I could write this. And as I mentioned, that was about 3 or 4 months of just being in that headspace trying to create it all. And after I wrote the story, I had the usual writer imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. I wasn't sure whether it was any good. Hey, I could send it to my mum and she told me it was great, but that doesn't bring me any closer to knowing if I'm a good writer or not. So I did start vetting it with some people that hadn't read it. And I did send it to a professional editor who worked for a publishing house. And the way it worked was she had her own editing services. And if she liked it, she would submit it to the house to review for 6 weeks. And then if they liked it, offer a deal. She got about 2/3 through the story and told her publishing house, don't even review, offer this guy a deal immediately. And whilst I was tempted to do it, my dream has always been a very simple one, and that's I just want to be able to walk into a store and see my book on the shelves, and I didn't put it there. It's been ordered through distribution or what have you, but basically that's the dream. Anything after that is just gravy, but for me, right? That's as far as I want to go for now. Like, that's the first step. So I figured this publishing house, though, wasn't a stepping stone towards that. It was a lot of print on demand stuff. So I spoke to the editor about that, and she agreed. She said, no, this should probably go further. At the same time, I knew writing a Ripper story that it would come under scrutiny from the Ripper community. Ironically, whilst fiction is something that comes under scrutiny, Ripper nonfiction comes under greater scrutiny. Like, if you have a story that says case closed or case solved, it's immediately going to be disrespected by the Ripper community. But I wanted to write a story that had the mainstream appeal of a thriller, but it also offered really good insight into the case, and people that were experts in the case would appreciate its accuracy. Like I said before, I didn't need to embellish on this story at all. There was so much interesting facts about the Ripper murders that this already makes for a great story without my help. I've just got to, the word I always use is braid. I've got to braid my fictional world into this factual world and kind of make both responsible for each other. That was the way I saw it. So anyway, I had sent it to probably the two most critical places I could have chosen, but to me, best way to vet it. So I sent it to a place called the Whitechapel Society, and I also sent it to Ripperologist magazine. Now, the Whitechapel Society don't print reviews, but I was just interested in their feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And Ripperologist magazine does, they dedicate like a number of pages to the nonfiction reviews and then the fiction reviews. There are books and books about the Ripper that come out every month. So at that time, while I was sort of in this state of what do I do with this story, I had queried some agents. I had received rejections. And I think a lot of that was because I was just so green when it came to writing queries. I had a lot to learn. I didn't write very good queries early on. When people laugh or cringe at their own writing, I read my early query letters. I'm like, oh my God, did I really say that?
Querying is an art.
It is. It is. I think some of it is formula, but some of it is also, some of it's lottery and some of it's just saying the right thing that's going to strike a chord with somebody. So but I got their feedback and it was through the roof. It was incredible feedback from them. The Whitechapel Society wanted to publish an article review about it. Ripperologist magazine wanted to review it, but both needed an ISBN to do it. In other words, I had to publish the book.
Right.
They're not going to review an unpublished manuscript. So I thought about it and made the decision, okay, maybe I'll self-publish this instead. And I did, and obviously it was very well received by the Ripper community, which is very rare for a fiction work. And I had people read it that I've never met before. I've made a lot of friends on this journey of people I've never met, but my story has allowed me to connect with them, and they've connected with my writing, and they've vowed to read anything I write, which is very flattering. And after I self-published, people talk down about self-publishing, but for me, the one gift that it gave me was immunity from imposter syndrome. I'll never feel it again, because the underlying question that that has writers either on their knees sometimes or in the fetal position wondering, do I write decent stuff? Well, that is the underlying question. Am I a good storyteller? Do people like what I write? And from my very brief stint of self-publishing, I learned, okay, I tell a decent story. People like my stories. So maybe I should try and pursue something, bigger. Plus, I had zero social media presence. So I was not, the phrase I always use is I'm a better storyteller than a story seller. And I was doing nothing to promote this story. Any copies that sold was basically word of mouth. I think Facebook was the only place where I really tried to put it out there. So after 6 months, I still queried, but at that point, it was like a trapdoor. This is what I was talking about with exclusion. Oh, self-published. I never got past first base with a single agent.
Mm-hmm.
No one wanted to read it. And then I met my first agent, Shannon also, and became friends with her and her agency, Victor's Literary, on Twitter. And during an Ask Agent session, I really showed my cynical side, and she sent me a private message, saying, "Do you want to talk about it a little more?" And I was surprised. Agents are usually not that accessible. I'm not saying they're inaccessible people, but to reach out privately, I considered against the norm.
Right.
So I immediately had an appreciation for that. So I told her about my story, and I said, "Look, I'm just getting crucified over this thing because because I briefly self-published it, and it doesn't have a chance. People aren't even reading it." So she asked for the full, and she offered representation 4 days later. And I was shocked, but she said, "I'm sorry it took so long. I actually read your story in just over a day, but I figured if I was calling you that soon, that might be just inspire a different thought process towards all of this altogether." I'm like, hey, I probably would have felt better or been more encouraged, but I loved Shannon. Shannon passed away, sadly, just over a year ago. But one of the things that I really miss and adored about her was she did see bigger picture, because I was very humbled when I spoke to her about signing with her, and she just said, "This isn't the only story you've got in you, is it?" I said, "No." She said, "Exactly." She said, "So whether we have issues with the self-published or not, I know you have other stories in that little head of yours, and I know it's going to produce other stories." And so that was, I wish other authors are afforded that kind of tolerance, because yes, some people may have self-published 10 books. That's not the end of them. I always say, like, some writers usually have their best story ahead of them, not behind them. So, if you're judging just the story and not the writer, I mean, obviously you're signing someone on account of the story. That's huge. But I think the writer has to be considered when looking at this. And the story, which I naively titled Jack the Ripper Live and Uncut, it was, to me, it reflects a lot of what potential I have creatively as a writer. It's been likened to Patterson with its "no, you're not quitting here" end of the chapter. It has some puzzles and mysteries within the mystery, sort of Dan Brown style. And these are authors that I admire. Don't intentionally mean to emulate. It's just, like you said, write what you know. I like to tell stories based on stories I like. And so, yes, I naively named it Jack the Ripper Live and Uncut because I thought if people typed Jack the Ripper in Amazon for searching for it, up it would come. I didn't know about their keyword algorithms when you self-publish, where you can say, I could have typed, Funyuns. And if someone typed Funyuns, my book comes up. So I could have just had it as a keyword and not necessarily in the title.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a very naive choice that served me very well. So anyway, trying to keep this chronological. After 6 months, I pulled the plug on it after I signed with Shannon. It underwent a lot of rewrites. It did go out on submission to a few editors, and the feedback was okay. One in particular, I found extremely validating. Actually, a guest of yours, you're familiar with him, Tom
Hogan.
Yes, he saw this story and he liked it a lot, and he knew, and it was just purely on the fact that it had too many speculative elements and sci-fi elements, that it just wasn't really what Berkeley was after, and I'm good with that. But he also reached out to me and said that it was almost like a nudge, like, stay at it. You can tell stories. You've got this. So I took that as huge encouragement. And again, it adds to me being stubborn, though. If someone says, oh, no, this story, can't go anywhere, I'm like, well, I think of the people that have liked it. And I was saying to someone only the other day who was down about their manuscript being rejected by an agent, I said, did they read it all? And they said, no. I said, well, why would you place stock in the opinion of somebody who hasn't read your book? I said, I know agents have to exclude, like that is the industry, and it's sad. And I'm sure they would love to read everything they get, but they don't have the time. But that was something that drove me through that process, was seeing readers' reactions to my story and the reviews I got stacked up against rejections from agents who had never even read more than the query sample. I knew where I was placing my belief. Like I said, I was almost immune to imposter syndrome. I was like, I'm going to just keep fighting until I find someone that believes in this. And I did. Like I said, Shannon sadly passed away. But I've been out on the Ripper circuit, I guess. I've participated at RipperCon. They had a panel dedicated to the Ripper in fiction. I was on a podcast, Rippercast. 2 weeks after the book came out, I was invited on to talk Ripper fiction with them as well. And it's sort of my pinned tweet, but I got to appear on the History Channel. And it even says the name of this friggin' self-published book on the screen when it says who I am, and people see this and the book's no longer available. But because I foolishly put it Jack the Ripper Live and Uncut, if the producers for that show, History's Greatest Mysteries, were looking for Jack the Ripper, and my book and my name came up everywhere. And sometimes, being a publicity hound is more beneficial than being a writer, I guess. But in the early days, I did appear on podcasts and blogs and in social site forums and everything like that to try and promote the book. But I was promoting in the wrong place. But it helped in this regard. So I have definitely seen good choices be rewarded on this journey. And I've also seen bad choices rewarded on this journey. And yes, some of it's luck, but that's why I'm always down to talk to people, to meet people, to discuss anything about my journey, because you never know who's going to listen. You never know who's going to read. You never know who's paying attention. And sometimes, hey, a fiction writer can be called up by the History Channel to be on their show. And I would never have expected that in a million years.
Right.
Not when I first started writing this story, that's for sure. And of course, all of this attention to this book has come after I pulled it from publication. It actually also won the Jack the Ripper Book of the Year award for fiction in 2018. But it had been out of publication for 6 months. I even asked it whether it qualified, and they said, yeah, it was published. People read it, so it qualifies. But I guess if there's a version of a posthumous award for a book, then Live and Uncut has it, I guess, because it was a book that was not available, but it was, they voted it as a winner. And again, that was a huge moment of validation for me, as well as a huge honor, because that was part of my dream realized. I said I wanted to write a Ripper story that Ripper experts dug, and to read reviews from authors whose books I bought for research, and seeing them vote for my book was just surreal times. It really was.
Oh, I bet. I love what you said about why would you listen to the opinion of someone who hasn't read your whole book? I think that a lot of people, and I was tempted to say writers, but I'm sure that it happens in every creative field. We take every single piece of criticism and we give them equal weight.
Right.
Especially when they say, you're terrible at this and you should never do it again. It's like, it's right. The easiest thing in the world to convince yourself that you're a terrible writer, you're a terrible musician, you're a terrible whatever. And
creative morale is like a house of cards.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on. I just wanted to sort of throw that in there.
I just feel like, it's so easy to forget that not everyone's opinion should be weighted equally.
Right.
Especially because, I mean, if you're querying an agent, odds are good I hope you've done your research and you're not, sending your psychological thriller off to a romance agent, right? Because that's never going to get you a
Right.
positive response. But, there are certain people who are more likely to be your audience than others. But they're also, as you say, if somebody's read the whole book and can offer you really thoughtful feedback on the whole book, that's worth listening to. Someone who's only read the first 10 pages can't really speak to anything but those 10 pages, which may or may not be like the rest of your book. So it's a challenge to kind of, keep your head on straight about that kind of thing if you don't view it as, well, how much effort did this person put into it? And, is it their thing?
And even at next level, when I've received feedback from editors, sometimes people will receive feedback and go, "Oh my God, I've got to change this immediately." And I don't think that's necessarily the case either. You should stick by your story. But obviously, if you have 5 agents or 5 editors come back and the feedback is consistent, obviously, yes, take note and consider, making that change. I committed to a full year's rewrite on the Murder Between Realms, the murder mystery fantasy, because a sole editor pointed one thing out, but I was basically to change my voice from third person to first, live it through the main character. And I thought, all right, I'm going to write 3 chapters in this first person and see what it's like. I wrote it and I'm like, it's so much better. So I knew, I'm like, okay, I'm in for the long haul here. And it was like 10, nearly 11 months worth of rewrites, but I knew it was going to be a so much better story if I made that commitment. Now, like I said, I've seen other people send me feedback and I'm like, especially if it's people that haven't read it all, because, and so many people place stock in that. And I've just learned, or whether it's learning or condition myself not to, to me, it's just like listening to the first 5 bars of a song. And like, let's say somebody listened to the first 30 seconds of Stairway to Heaven. How that song starts is very different to how that song ends.
For sure.
And it's an amazing, epic song. But if you're judging it by the first 30 seconds, you probably might pass on the thing. So some of it, much of this is luck, but I think part of it is making your own luck as well. My current agent, for example, Amy Collins from Talcott Notch, I met Amy at a conference in New York, and I definitely place a lot of stock in meeting people in person. And I still maintain I'm the luckiest guy in the world to be represented by this lady, because she's an incredible agent. I don't know if she would have signed me just based on seeing my work and having not met me and getting to know me over a 4-day period. That I'm not sure, but mostly because Amy represents genres that I write genres that Amy doesn't represent. I'm her first thriller. I might be her first thriller client. I don't know, but I believe epic fantasy is also new territory too. So, if I had just sent that in, like you said, someone said, "Oh, I don't do thriller." Yeah, well, why is this even here? So, yeah, some of it you got to test the waters. Like even when I sent it to Tom, I felt it didn't have much of a chance because I know what type of books Tom edits and represents, and I knew that my book sort of went a bit outside the box with the speculative elements. In a way, I got the exact answers I thought I would probably get in the first place, but I still wanted to see what opinion he had of the story as a thriller, though. And like I said, you get what you choose to take on as fuel for your own fight it's entirely yours. And I see some people that get beat down by feedback that they get or negative feedback that they get, and some people get feedback that's not that negative. It's actually pretty encouraging, but they see the glass is half empty in that regard. So, hey, some people might say I'm in denial. I don't think so. I believe in my stories, and I'm going to keep fighting for them.
It doesn't sound to me like you're in denial.
Thank you. I've had good either I've got a lot of enablers in this world, or no, I've got people that genuinely, have an affinity for my stories. So that gives me belief that there's more people out there that would want to read them.
Yeah, I think there's been enough positive feedback that you're not in denial.
Thank you.
But I am curious because you had mentioned to me that you went to a flea market.
Yes.
With no books.
I did.
And I'm so curious to know how this went.
Okay, this is my lesson in never taking a step back from putting yourself out there. So my first public appearance as an author or writer, whatever you want to call it, I was at a book fair at a flea market in Clearwater, Florida. I had accepted under the guise that my book would be self-published by then. It wasn't. I still had work to do on it to get it ready. And so I remained committed to this flea market, even though I did not have a book. So I've turned up to this book fair without a book to sell. I made some swag and I printed like a little pamphlet with a sample chapter. I had iPads running some clips, like going through the Ripper murders, the Ripper suspects. I had what was then the original cover made into like a movie poster size, and it stood there. I didn't realize that the book fair was outside. It was under shelter, but there was huge winds, and the rain was, what is it that Forrest Gump says? Like the stinging rain, but it was like horizontal rain as well. So I spent most of my 4.5 hours there fighting to keep my stuff on the table. But while I was there, probably only maybe 15, 17 people came by in that time. And one person that did come by owned a local bookstore. And he offered to throw a launch party for the book when it was published. So I took him up on that. And when I was there, they invited me back 3 days later because the Tampa Steampunk Society was having a party at the store. And there was a panel of steampunk writers or fantasy writers that were signing books. My book is not steampunk at all, but they sort of tied the Victorian era to that. So I was down with that. But while I was there, I met a best-selling local author who I just said, look, you're who I eventually want to be. But I would love to pick your brain about writing in general, the industry, all that sort of stuff. So we grabbed coffee about 2 weeks later. She gave me some brutal truths, and it was changes that I needed to make, and it was all for the benefit. And it definitely led me to a better place in my journey and my story to a better place as well. But yeah, all of this, and the lady that ran the book fair at the flea market, I met her at the end to shake hands and say thanks a lot. And she invited me to appear on 2 panels at MegaCon in Tampa and MegaCon in Orlando. And it was local writers talking about the craft. If I had kept the book published, I probably would have been on a few more MegaCons. But on my own admission, I said, do I even qualify to speak on these panels if I'm no longer a published author? So, but all of this came from committing to be visible as a writer for the first time with a book. And yeah, my little jaunt to the windy, rain-whipped flea market in Florida turned out to be one of the best decisions I ever made, because it's led me to some wonderful people, some great opportunities, and it's things that enhance, I think, people as a writer, because a lot of writers are introverts, but somebody says, hey, you're going to be on a panel at MegaCon, you get over that introversion real quick. Luckily, I'm not reserved in that manner. I used to be that guy, but actually, another story entirely. But singing karaoke broke me in that regard. Totally turned me from introvert to extrovert. And and I've also been involved either through work or through sports. I coached sports for a long time. So I'm not shy when it comes to public speaking. So, those things have helped. But like I said, if you get these opportunities, anything you feel a little squirrely about or a bit shy, you got to get over those, because someone is just dying to pounce on in front of you and take that opportunity. And that's not mean spirited. It's just a competitive market. And it's just, in a way, human nature too. People just want that same opportunity. And that's what I've always said to people, like that have had agents that are thinking of leaving them. And I've said, there are tens of thousands of writers that would gladly trade places with you. So, if you don't like it, that's fine. But just think about someone's already rubbing their hands, hoping you do, because they want to take your place. So, I've learned to appreciate what I have along this journey. But yeah, definitely want more from my career, and I think this is definitely going to be a good year. Murder Between Realms is out on submission. It went out very late last year, and Live and Uncut, or the new iteration of it, it's been subject to 4 years worth of rewrites. So the story's still there, the plot is still there, which is one of the biggest things. But there is added content. There is a lot of changes that I made in terms of learning technically how to be a better writer. And I'm that's probably going in in April. And I'm also, like I said, looking to doing new work so I can just, I just want to give Amy as much work as I can this year, and so she can hate me for it. But no, I definitely want to write a new thriller this year. I definitely want to get back in the thriller lane.
Well, I love with the flea market story that you didn't let the fact that the book wasn't out yet stop you, that you came up with all of these other things, because so many people would be like, I can't go, I don't have anything, and stop right there.
Looking back on it, I think it was sort of like a tangible version of pre-ordering. So I couldn't sell my book there, but if someone came past and was interested, they could then, I think I had like I said, a pamphlet made up with some details, and they could easily follow that for when the book came out. So that was at least the intention I saw behind that. It's almost like a movie trailer, trying to get a little preview of what's to come and then be interesting going. So that was the way that I saw it. I for the longest time, I think I've thought bigger picture for these sorts of things. And like I said, any opportunity for people to either hear my voice or read my words, I see that as just, again, an opportunity connecting with people, because you never know who that's going to connect with. Like I said, my book fair took me to some pretty incredible places. At MegaCon, I got a photo with, oh God, I can never remember his name. He was a Doctor Who, Anthony Capaldi.
Peter Capaldi?
Peter Capaldi. I'm sorry. See, whoops.
That's okay. I'm a big Doctor Who fan. I have
a photo with him. I have a photo with him, and he's got his hand out out like so, like reaching out. And I thought, I can Photoshop my book into book cover in that hand. I can make it look like he's got it. So no, but I actually do love Peter Capaldi. It's just the name I always forget, unfortunately. I even told him at the time, like, I loved him in The Loop. It's a brilliant movie, and yeah, he was just fantastic in that. But yes, it's taking me to places where like I said, just wanting to put my name out there. You never know when it's something that's good that might come from that. Yeah, and I can think of so many examples, not just one time, I've been fortunate, or one time, one catalyst for, that's led to bigger things. There's been multiple catalysts everywhere.
Yeah, I think as soon as you start doing things like that, all sorts of things that you can't possibly have predicted start kind of falling into place, which is slightly metaphysical, but I think it's true. And because I've seen it with this podcast, so I think that the act of taking action is sort of both overrated and underrated. Like, just doing something on its own is not necessarily, okay, I wrote a page of a story. Yay, I took action. That alone is not going to get you very far. But if you keep doing it, then it will. But
Yes.
I think our culture always talks about taking action, but doesn't talk about how things can happen that you could never have predicted. To
Right.
just like you talk about.
Right. Well, and a part of that too was when I was contemplating what story to write next 3 years ago, I was going to write another story that featured Carl Axford. He's the main character in my story. I actually had wrote a second story called Cult Following that's currently in manuscript limbo. Hopefully it'll have its day in the sun one day. But I thought, well, I can't keep writing these because you have to have the first one on the table before you can think of the others. And so I thought of something else that I wanted to write in case somebody said, oh, this is great. But again, maybe something like, hey, you're self-published. What have you got that's unpublished? I needed something else. And as a result, I wrote Murder Between Realms and built a whole different world from that. And, went into a area of writing that I'd never accessed myself. And, as I mentioned, people have said that they believe it's the best story I've got, but that wouldn't have come from just saying, I'm putting all my eggs in this basket and I'm going to ride till I die kind of thing. And I see a lot of writers that do that they will only stick with that one story and keep going. Like I said before, a lot of writers, their best stories ahead of them, and to just rest on one story and that's the bankable future. I'm just not. I just can't sit still and let that happen. I want to write more stories, yes, to increase the opportunity, but again, you never know if you're going to if that next story is something that's much better and people are going to like that because of what's in it. The industry changes.
Well, and you change.
I have, absolutely.
Yeah, every story you write, you're learning something new that's going to go into the stories that follow.
Oh yeah, and once I was in an agency, I learned so much about the craft. I remember receiving feedback from Live and Uncut, and somebody said, "Well, there's a lot of passive voice in this, and it should be more active." And my response was, "Hmm." I had no idea what that meant, and so obviously and it was hard. It was a grind trying to learn how to reinvent that because in a sense it's changing your voice. But I realized eventually how to do that. And when I wrote Murder Between Realms, there was nowhere near as much passive as there was. It was more active as it should be. So yeah, I've learned a lot of technical lessons along the way. I think being able to tell stories is something that you've either got or you don't. I see on Twitter, on social media, so many times people say, "Would you rather be a technically great writer or of a bad story, or have a great story written poorly?" And I've always said, "Great story written poorly," because people are always interested in a great story. There will be critics of technique. People like Dan Brown and James Patterson and other writers have critics of the literary technique. Do they care? No, look at, and I could say something as superficial as sales, but it's not. I would say it's readership.
Mm-hmm.
These two writers in particular have a vast readership, but whether you consider them the most gifted technical writers of all time or not, it's immaterial. They tell great stories, and that's why people keep coming back for whatever they write.
Yeah, because story is what connects people, connects all of us.
Oh,
Everything.
absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Like I read the original self-published version of Live Uncut, and I cringe a lot. Yeah, I loved ellipses back then. I loved exclamation marks, and I loved passive voice. All of that's been fixed now, but I had a lot of readers that didn't care.
Mm-hmm.
That they were caught up in the story. Even if they had issue with the technicalities, it was never something that was brought up because it was the story that connected with them. And I think, like I said, you can tell someone about how you tell stories, but I don't think you can tell somebody how to do that. You've either got that imagination or creativity or sense of what people want to read or hear, or not. So, to me, it's I would rather be in that position. The technicalities you can learn; they can be taught. Being able to build a world that's not as easy to teach.
And that's exactly right. You can always, and editors exist for a reason too. There's always a way to
Right.
fix technical errors. But I
Yes.
think there is a certain kind of writing and storytelling instinct that maybe you can. I don't want to say that nobody can learn it. I think if you want to learn it and you sit down and you read a lot and really absorb a lot, you
Hmm.
can, change how much of it you have. But, that's the important part. I was astonished when I started my MFA program, and there was a whole moment in the orientation where they talked about, taking care of your proofreading and your spelling. And if you're not not great with grammar and not great with spelling, make sure you have somebody read your stuff before you submit it, because I've always been very good at that.
Right.
And I just sat there thinking, how can you be a writer and be in an MFA program and not know how to do this? And it was just such an eye-opening learning experience for me,
Yeah.
because it was like, yeah, I mean, just because you're good at punctuation and editing doesn't mean everybody is, but that doesn't mean they can't tell a good story. That doesn't mean they can't write well. All of those things are things that somebody can take care of.
No, for sure. I usually try to justify it with one simple stat. It's not going to sound very humble, but it is a stat nonetheless. I am not a very good technical writer. I am the first person to say that. I have friends that I truly envy because they are literary writers and they have the ability to tell commercial stories as well. I'm commercial all day. But I've only ever had two agents request fulls for manuscripts. Both have signed me. And I know it's not because they read it and gone, oh man, we've got months of edits with this guy if we sign him. It they see, to me, they see something in the story, and I think that's how it's worked for me. It's just like not going to college. For IT, it's not something I would advocate for everybody. I would not say anything that I've done in IT or in writing is what's recommended to the what would be the norm. But I think I'm just merely explaining what has worked
Mm-hmm.
for me. And I think like Murder Between Realms, I had it when I signed with Amy. I still had 10 months worth of edits ahead of me, and so she signed me for the first person version. So the plot was, I believe, what got me over the line. It wasn't voice because here I was changing voice. So I believe it was the plot. The one thing that I've never been asked to change, whether it's a critique partner, whether it's an editor, an agent, I have never had someone tell me to change the plot, and I will hang my hat on that. There's a lot of other things I've been asked to change. I wrote the original Murder Between Realms in 8 weeks, and I spent 3 years editing and rewriting it. So that's also a good lesson in once you've done with the end, it's not, you should type the end and then say the beginning, because that's when the
Absolutely.
hard work truly starts. Creating is my happy place. I hate editing, maybe because I know I have to do so much of it. but yes, to me, it's the technicalities can always be worked out. You've got to have that good story as a basis, and whether it's fortunate or unfortunate, that's where the market is. But it doesn't have to be edgy your seat stuff. There's so many other genres that don't rely on that. Again, it's just a good story, and some genres have almost like the same backbone or template to every type of story that comes out. Readers don't care if it's a good story, if it's that type of story that they want to read, they'll read it
That's
for
right.
sure.
That's right.
And that's why there are such huge fan bases for for writing, or for stories that are not as technical. When I think of a very technically well written story like Pride and Prejudice, that story doesn't really exist anymore. It's more But if there was just a very basic romance novel based on the same characters, the same premise, and everything else, it would still be a hit for sure.
Yeah, because we've seen it with that particular story a couple times.
Well, hey, Seth Graham. I can't remember his name. Seth Graham Smith, I think his name is. He wrote Pride and Prejudice and decided to add some zombies in there,
Right.
and that was a global phenomenon.
Well, and Bridget Jones is Pride and Prejudice.
Right.
And yeah.
Oh yeah. People love retellings.
Yeah.
For sure. And I'm a fan of it too. Unknown, that's something that we haven't shared yet. I actually wrote 3 like little pilot scripts, and I also have a short story version of them. One was a Sherlock Holmes retelling. One was a Dracula retelling. It was sort of like What We Do in the Shadows meets Fleabag. So no, it is though, because it is Dracula, modern day Dracula, talking to the reader, like breaking that fourth dimension, that fourth dimensional, and having that internal dialogue. But yeah, but no, he's very average now. What happened way back when is broken him. He doesn't want to be that guy anymore, kind of thing. But he still he lives as a vampire. But no, but I also had a one with that actually brought the Hunchback of Notre Dame and the Phantom of the Opera together in fiction, and that is a story I would love to write. But even based on what I've written, because geographically their stories are very close, and they're both also very similar characters in the fact that they had love for somebody and it was forbidden or just not allowed by the society around them. And and I thought that is just such a great connection to have, because they can't be too different. Like the Phantom is very cultured, the Hunchback is a lot, huge oaf, but they have that one thing. But the similarities at their is at their core. It's not like saying, "Hey, I like watching hockey. Oh, I like watching hockey too." Like these guys have had their hearts broken, and I believe when the Phantom was written, it was based on Quasimodo, or there was similarities drawn from that. Gaston Leroux saw Victor Hugo's novel and character as an inspiration for the Phantom, in the same fact that they had one love and lost it, and it wasn't so much their fault as it was, like I said, as a society around them that just wouldn't allow it.
Well, I'd read that story.
I can send you what I got, but yeah, it's for me, it's a case of too many stories, not enough time. But
it's a good problem to have.
In a way, I got to say it is, but it's also very frustrating.
True.
Because I think of these stories that I've wanted to tell, and yeah, hopefully I'll get some opportunities to do that. But yeah, I see that one with Quasimodo and the Phantom. Yeah, it was a bit funny, but it was also very much like a World War One thriller. And I know time-wise that doesn't synchronize with the Hunchback story, but his involvement in the story is accounted for, like why he is there. But then I thought about it, because I was thinking about this, and I'm thinking, these are fictional characters. I read a story where Abraham Lincoln hunts vampires. I think I'm good.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a whole liberty-taking genre out there.
Oh, especially with fictional characters that are in public domain. You see a lot of that, and retellings where it's a huge departure from the original tale. And I'm supportive of that for sure. But yeah, I think there should be some faith paid to the original fan base of these stories, though. And yeah, I definitely, what I briefly wrote for both of these guys, it was bearing that in mind, like the original Hunchback lore and the original Phantom of the Opera, sort of story as well. Like I didn't go for too much departure from who they are and from the setting, but I definitely obviously, yeah, in fiction you take liberties. Like with the Ripper case, I took liberties, but that was mostly in parts of the case that were grey areas and to this day unexplained. So if I have an explanation for that in my story, people aren't going to say, "Oh, well, that's just not true." Well, there's currently no factual explanation for it, so this will do, at
Right.
least for this story.
Right.
And it reminds me of a chat that I had with a friend of mine when I was writing Live and Uncut, and he said, "Does your story put forward a theory about who the Ripper was?" And I said, "Yeah, it does." He said, "Do you believe it?" I said, "No, I don't." And he said, "Well, why? Why would you even write that?" I said, "Because I'm not writing a textbook. If I was writing a textbook, where I said that's the most brutal job in the world, is trying to write a suspect book about the Ripper, and therefore you're putting someone forward as a legitimate suspect. That jury of millions is going to look for reasons of innocence, not guilt." So, and I just said to him, "No, because I want to spin a good yarn with this story. So I went with a theory that sounds plausible for sure, but to people that know better, no, it's not a plausible theory, but it's still entertaining nonetheless. In a fiction thriller, that's what you're looking for. But as I mentioned, there is a ton of research in the story, and I really wanted to put people in Whitechapel when I wrote it, and so to do that, I had to fully immerse myself in a rabbit hole that I enjoyed being down, but there were times when it was very hard. My wife sometimes saw me, crying at the desk and said, "What's up?" And I just, I'd be shaking my head saying, "I just can't believe, that this was done to somebody." And, but in a way, as painful as that was, it does translate well to feeling inspired to write. And I remember when I wrote, some of the chapters that involved the murders, the research was very hard, but I wanted to try and give the victims a bit of real estate in the story, because it's not just about Jack. But I also wanted to, I wanted that research or that pain to translate it into the story, and I definitely drew a lot of motivation from that, and I think it showed, when you take something that you research and you're putting it into a story. So the nights when I was writing one example I'll give, the Mary Kelly, which was the fifth murder, and probably not probably, it was the most gruesome. I was alone at the house. My wife and children had gone on a road trip and mistakenly left me here to think about Jack the Ripper for 10 days. But I knocked out a lot of the book in that time. But no, but I had to write Mary Kelly's murder, and I wrote, I think it was 3 or 4 chapters that night that go through the events of that evening. And I went to bed at about 2 a.m. and I did not sleep till about 5:30 because I was just so amped from writing that. And the chapter was playing out visibly in my head while I was laying in bed trying to sleep, and it wasn't happening. And I just thought, you know what, if my reader feels 10% of this when they read it, then I'll know I did a good job. And yeah, it was I enjoy researching that case, but I know people that live it every day, and I couldn't do that.
Sure.
And that's why when I wrote the book, my writing hours were from 10 p.m. till 2 a.m. because I'm not going to have, autopsy photographs and stuff like that on my screen while my kids are awake. So that was when I was a night owl by trade, so that helped. But yeah, I wrote that book mostly between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m.
Wow. Well, I hope that it finds itself a new home sooner rather than later so everybody can check it
Thank
out.
you. Thank you. I do too. And, look, I always say to people, if they want to read it, I'm fine with sending people like a PDF copy of it, because I'm not signed to anybody at the moment, but obviously I like gaining readers, and I've done other either podcasts or interviews or TV appearances where I've had people contact me about the story, and I've had people read it, and they've now told me that they're fans, and they want to know when it comes out, because they will get the published version of it. Even people that have read the self-published version have already said, like, when it gets published, that they want to get another copy of it. So, well, it's going to be different in some ways. So, yeah, it's not a direct dupe of what you got back then. Like I said, a lot less ellipses, a lot less exclamation marks. So, but the plot is still there. So that's what's important, right?
As a chronic abuser of the ellipsis, which for those who don't know is those 3 dots in the middle of a sentence where someone trails off, where there's something that's been taken out. I feel that one.
I felt the pain of deleting those when I did them. But for one character, I actually left it in, because I said to my agent, well, what if this is just part of his speech? Like, this is a part of how he talks, because this was somebody who's confident but a little socially awkward too. And given the circumstances that he was talking, it was definitely a socially awkward situation. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the ellipsis stayed for one character, but I removed it for the rest.
Well, keep us posted on all of that.
I will. Thank you.
And thanks for coming and talking with me today.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate being invited on the show and having a chat with you. It's been great. Really appreciate it.
That's our show for this week. Thanks so much to my guest, Matt Leyshon, and to you. Please leave a review for this episode. There's a link right in your podcast app, and in it, tell us about a time when you put yourself on the line and how it went. If you enjoyed our conversation, I hope you'll share it with a friend. Thanks so much. If this episode resonated with you, don't forget to get in touch on any of my social platforms or even via email at nancy@fycuriosity.com and tell me what you loved. And if you're feeling a little bit less than confident in your creative process right now, and you haven't yet signed up for my free email series on 6 of the most common creative beliefs that are messing you up, please check it out. It'll untangle those myths and help you get rolling again. You can find it at fycuriosity.com, and there's also a link right in your podcast app. See you there, and see you next week. Follow Your Curiosity is produced by me, Nancy Norbeck, with music by Joseph McDade. If you like Follow Your Curiosity, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to tell your friends. It really helps me reach new listeners. Thanks.